like it increased my patience, I think, as well.
That's great. Thank you for mentioning about the resilience and about your childhood experiences. I remember also similar my childhood. I also there was moments when like I um felt like although I felt like kind of lonely in my classes, at least I found ways to like, better appreciate myself, and like I was obsessed with like certain objects like exit signs, and I kind of use
Yeah.
that to like my creativity, so I can kind of relate to you in that sense.
Yes, absolutely. I did the same. I remember like there
Oh,
was one classroom when I was in elementary school in one grade. I remember there was this one particular part of the wall where the paint faded a
oh,
little at the ceiling. And I remember I used to look at it and it kind of like fade because it almost kind of reminded me of like when water and and the when like the sky and the ocean or the sky and sea meet. And so sometimes I would just kind of stare up and look at just you find ways to entertain yourself to or to make it through different circumstances. There's I think that we have people often we don't truly appreciate how much capacity we have for survival and growth.
no, I agree. And also like I remember looking at the towel pattern. So like when I feel overwhelmed, I like look at certain
Mhm.
patterns that make me feel calm and more mindful of my environment.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah,
Uh,
carpet patterns too. I used to look at those. There are certain ones that
wow, that's fascinating. So for the next question, how does your identity as a disabled Black woman construct your motivation to advocate for the disability community, including Black people with disabilities?
I think it's interwoven into almost everything that I do, and almost it's something for me that it can't really be separated, and I believe it gives me a sense of empathy, and in terms of being able to, even though people's experiences are unique to them, there is still certain things that are common across our communities. And so knowing that, being in circumstances where I wish someone would have been, would have advocated for me, or where I wish there had been, greater understanding or more access, and having those experiences, and truly not wanting, that those things not to be repeated, to as much as possible to, eliminate or reduce, those types, those things being someone else's reality. That it has been something that has I don't know, it's very, there's very little I think that I can think of that it doesn't touch. And and in a great way. It's not all just fighting. It's also kind of like the like embodying who one is. And there is a in Sincerely Your Autistic Child, one of our chapter contributors, Kayla Smith, is a Black autistic woman, and refers to herself in her chapter as a triple threat. Talking about the fact that when you look at misogynoir and ableism, when you are gender diverse, of course, certain racial backgrounds, and just in general, like you kind of occupy a lot of different intersections where you're going to where those oppressions are very real in your life. And so for me, it's like, if I'm already going to have to speak up, I might as well speak up for us all. Not just for myself. I might as well say what needs to be said. If I feel like there's something that others could gain or learn from a circumstance or an experience, I figure it doesn't hurt to try to have, open the door as wide as possible, and just kind of, ask maybe the unasked questions, and determine, get clarification on things, and make sure that people's that different perceptions, and different perspectives are considered, because I think that a lot of times people do very much silo individuals into one part of your identity or another, when then that's not the reality. We are like a patchwork quilt of all of these different things that we are. So for me, it is it's unfathomable to me that I would have some kind of awareness or understanding of how challenging it can be, or how someone could misperceive or misread something and not use that experience that I had constructively in some way to pay it forward or to make a change. Like if I feel that, the idea of leave no trace, that saying or phrase is not one that I want to be to be associated with me in my life. I want to leave a trace. I want to leave a trace. I don't want to leave things the way I found them, because chances are they were inaccessible when I found them.
That's a great point. Like leaving a trace, like kind of talk about like inspiration and wanting to like inspire others. I really appreciate that, and I also hope to like inspire others in the future as like activists have inspired me. So like kind of bi-directional relationship.
Exactly.
So thank you for your response. So kind of related to like your contributions with like with your books. I understand that you contributed to the book The Weight of All of Our Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Can you please tell us about this book? What inspired you to contribute to the book The Weight of All in Our Dreams?
Sure. And we're hoping actually in a few years that there will be an updated edition that will have new editors and new contributors, as well as some elements of the original book. And so that will be something that I hope that, people will be able to, have access to. But first, I wanted to give, major credit to Lydia X. Brown, who really, envisioned this idea. It's funny because these days, as there's more awareness of neurodiversity and more openness, more and more people are able to find community and find others who have similar experiences. But several years ago, it wasn't like that, and so some people in the community, some of us gravitated to one another simply because we were at some type of event, symposium, conference, and we glanced around the room and they're like, oh, there's another brown or black person here. Like even though they're a stranger, like you're just so happy to see another, neurodivergent or autistic face, of yours in the sea of, parents and professionals, and of which there's, nothing wrong with that. But sometimes, again, the self-advocacy is very important, and visibility and representation is. And so, realizing so many times we were like the only or one of the only, Lydia expressed interest in, having a way to kind of compile the stories of different autistic people of color. And so over time, that idea, developed traction, and they collaborated with Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network, AWN, and along with Alicia Ashkenazi and myself, put out a call for contributors. And it's really interesting because there is a book, and it's actually, I'd recommend it to anyone if they have time. It's an open access book, so it's completely free. And it can be found by searching the words autistic community and the neurodiversity movement, stories from the front line. And I'll see if I can maybe put it in the chat if I'm allowed to, or what have you. But it's edited by Stephen Kapp, and it's a completely free book. If you get it online, it's open access, all of the chapters, and it has lots of different stories of people who are sharing things that happened, in the earlier part of the autism rights movement. And so in that book, I have a chapter where I kind of talk about how All the Weight of Our Dreams came to be, and I just kind of like reflect on the fact that I almost was kind of by accident that I was involved, because initially, Alicia and Lydia were leading the task, and I was simply just going to contribute to the book. But there was such a huge amount of interest, so we basically put things on social media. We emailed people, we talked to people, we basically told everyone we know, hey, do you know an autistic person of color? They want to tell their story, have them contribute, writing or artwork or, what have you to this, anthology. And so we got things from so many different places. We got things from, we got a little girl, like a preschooler, we got, senior citizens, we got everyone in between, people from different countries. We wish we had had more people from the global South than we did, but we did have kind of essentially a multinational group of people who had contributed, and there were so many, the volume was so much that they wanted to bring on another editor. And so so I was asked, and at that time, I guess I can tell you, I'll just be honest, the closest thing to editing experience I'd had was being in high school yearbook and newspaper, and then the college volunteer. I did some volunteering on the yearbook, and and that I didn't even write stories for that one. I just took pictures because that allowed me to be more antisocial. I could go to stuff, snap pics, and not have to talk to people. And so, but I loved writing. Like, writing was something important to me. And so, though I didn't have any formal experience, I wanted to join and help in the way that I could. And so, it to me, it was inspiring because I just imagined somebody picking up a book, a big, thick book, and realizing that every single person who wrote all these 500 something pages is someone Black or brown. It's from this person's, is Desi. This person is, Yoruba. This person is, Mexican American, whatever, just like multiracial, just, different experiences. And I wanted to be able to have something like that for us. And so it was an interesting process because it was pretty much a community funded endeavor, other than a few very small grants. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network gave us a small grant. The Ohio Developmental Disabilities Council, of course, Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network provided a great deal of logistical and financial support, but a lot of people in the community, people donating. We had GoFundMe, people sent $10 and $5 and $20. And so all of that together allowed us to pay every single contributor, because we were not going to, just pay people in exposure. We wanted to show that disabled labor is a value. So we wanted to pay everyone a fair market rate. We wanted them to retain the copyright of their work so they could use it not just in our edited collection, but in others. We wanted to be able to have a fully disabled team in terms of the formatting and graphic design and everything. And we also wanted to take a very light approach to the editing, so to where we would not substantively change people's terminology. And so really, I'm very grateful because it's, it feels like it's our baby, the book. And although there's been, we've learned some things since then, as you gain and you grow over time. I'm just thankful because it was intended to be the first widespread edited collection of predominantly autistic voices of color. It's in more than 100 libraries around the world. It's been taught in more than 20 different, it's been utilized as a text in more than 20 different undergraduate and graduate courses at numerous universities. And so it was a learning experience and something that I remain proud of.
I'm so proud that your team were able to contribute to this book. And actually, in my disability studies course, I remember reading this book and I was very fond of it, to the point I mentioned in my project. So I really applaud you for coming together to represent voices from people of color. I think we need more of that.
Yes, absolutely.
And I hope in the future to write memoir and have my voice represented too, as a neurodivergent Muslim. So thank you for inspiring me. Right. I learned that you have interacted with many disability rights activists. How do these interactions facilitate your own advocacy efforts?
So it's interesting because I was just looking in the chat at a few things that were mentioned, and I saw that there was a question about what brings joy and healing when working toward, the, liberation of Black disabled people. And it's interesting because I was thinking about that, the answer for that. And I was like, wow, some of that is, it's interesting because it's almost like there's a need for it, but doing it, being involved in it, brings almost a sense of healing or in itself, even if nothing is really fixed yet. It's interesting. And then I see there's also a question about, being, my family's background. So my parents are immigrants. And so there's a lot of, it's just very interesting about, there's a mentioning here about ancestral spirituality and self-esteem. And so I'm going to address that one, but I want to get back to the question you'd asked me about the activists and try to tie them together. I have learned so much from my peers, so much. It's really humbling to me to be able to have these experiences, that are both fulfilling and meaningful, and also really, in ways mind-blowing. It's so interesting, the ideas that people have, or the experiences that they have, and the just, I don't know, the exponential, impact of, being with your community, being together and working together and supporting each other and understanding each other. It has taught me a lot. In some ways, it has. I feel like it has helped me to, hone my craft and be be more. I've always considered myself open-minded, but I feel like we all have our areas, that we don't understand, our areas that are not our expertise. And one example that I'd like to give is that I used to say very frequently, when I would, was trying to counter ableist perspectives about disability. And I would say, oh my gosh, why is everybody saying that autistic people are trapped in our bodies? That there's like a normal person trapped inside, we're locked inside. That is not true. That is so demeaning. That is not our experience at all. That's just how you perceive us. And I would say that universally. And I remember, some of my, my colleagues, my non-speaking colleagues, saying, I do feel trapped in my body. Like, I don't know about you, maybe that's how you intend to move or whatever, but I have experiences where it does feel like, behavior is communication, but I'm not communicating, the behavior is not communicating the way I want it to be. Or so, I had to realize, wow, that this mentality that I had perceived as, being solely derived from ableism was also true. Some people's real, genuine experiences being disabled. And so it made me realize that, I needed to kind of be cognizant of that. And so it is, so things of that nature. And also just, it has helped me also try to connect different movements and different needs that one has in different, and also to validate different methods, because I think I really believe strongly in like in public intellectualism, public pedagogy. I think that we all have something to teach someone, and we all have something to learn from one another as well. And so being able to amplify lived experience and the wisdom that the community brings, with or without the pieces of paper, behind their name, is something that I feel is important to me. I also try to use to meet people where they are. So, this person might have a podcast. This person might have a training course that they want you to be involved in. This person, there might be, I've done story time, reading to children. And so I think these experiences it brings you into spaces where you can share not just your perspective, but also that of others in your community who may not have been given a seat at the table. You can basically plop them at the table, or their perspectives there.
And this is amazing. I also like to advocate for myself. I try to remember to appreciate my lived experiences. Like whenever I talk to them about where I come from, I like to know what my lived experiences are, how it plays a major role in who I am. So I agree that it's important to appreciate the lived experiences. So I realized that you're involved with Advocacy Without Borders. I want to learn more about this. Can you please share what the organization is and your role is? What is the mission of Advocacy Without Borders? How does this organization aim to empower individuals with disabilities from underrepresented groups?
Thank you. So Advocacy Without Borders launched on my birthday. Wow. February 7th. And I just realized that next year will be 10 years. That's wow. Like it doesn't seem like it's been that long. It's amazing. And it really was just kind of a way for me. I had been involved in different and collaborative work and individual work. And one thing that and a thought that kept coming to me over and over is that some people would say, oh, well, when I get my degree, I'll be able to advocate more for that or do more for that. Or, well, I'm a mom and I don't really feel like I can say much because I'm not, a whatever professional. Or someone would say, I'm a clinician, I'm a researcher, I don't have lived experience. Or someone would say, oh, well, my son is, young and, he's cognitively delayed. And so it was always like people felt like there was some kind of bar that you had to reach to be an advocate. Like, oh, this person has earned it because they can speak this way. They've got these degrees, they've got this connection. And I was like, no, that's not what advocates, that we all have something to share. The advocacy equals you, advocate equals you. Do you have the capacity to side eye, shake your head, really like you're advocating, no, you're saying no. It doesn't require, it can use all of these wonderful things, all of these, philosophical tools, and it can, access to these different things. Those things are great, but they aren't necessary, and everyone has something to contribute. Everyone can make a difference. Everyone is of value. And so it was basically my way of trying to encourage, some people, would feel like, well, oh, I just run a support group for, these children or whatever. I don't, or I do this, or I do that, or I just, I write, someone would say, oh, I draw zines, or I do this. And they would think that that's so small. And I'm thinking, do you have any idea how many people you're touching, or how much value there is in the work that you're doing, and how amazing it is, and how we need people in those spaces, because we can't all do the same thing. And so that was so really, it was just kind of like my way of trying to connect everything that I do, all of the different things that I care about, and not have them in these different little pockets, but have them in kind of one place. So it's a small nonprofit. We're, primarily virtual even before the pandemic. And we, so it's myself and a small team, and we are just really involved in promoting meaningful, community leadership and involvement. It shouldn't be this passive thing where these people are working on our behalf. No, work with us. We shouldn't be the supporting characters in our own stories. We have a right to be, it's our table, not even just at the table. It's our table to determine what's at the meal on the table if we choose to eat. So it's really, right now I'm doing a lot of kind of intersectional work, some qualitative research, and some digital projects that are, looking at various disparities, and also archival efforts. And it's just been really great. And I'm just, I'm applying for some grants in hopes that I can support a few more. I try to support a student each semester. And so hoping to be able to support some more if I get others. Yeah.
I wish you the best of luck. I also want to pursue research and learn more about the intersectionality. So hopefully the grants work out, and it's amazing that you sponsor like a student. So I applaud you.
Thanks.
So for my final question, I recognize that you are also involved with the Autistic Women Non-Binary organization. Can you please share what the organization is and your role is? What is the mission of AWN? How do your contributions to the Autistic Women Non-Binary organization empower your voice as a disabled Black activist?
So I can talk about AWN all day, even though Advocacy Without Borders is my baby, but AWN kind of took me in when I was a baby, advocate, so to speak, in terms of it's interesting because AWN, which was originally Autism Women's Network, formed because there was an autistic person who had an autistic child, and then themselves were autistic as well, and couldn't really find a lot of resources that were relevant to different, to gender diverse individuals. At that time, everything was for either little bitty boys or maybe an adolescent. If you weren't in those categories, or then there was really not a lot of attention paid to you. And so initially it was just a way for people to kind of have a sense of camaraderie. But AWN has always been about intersectional work and restoration. And so has really grown to, to provide a lot of work in terms of like mutual aid, fiscal sponsorship, a lot of, work to try to promote gender justice. There's the executive director is actually the lead researcher now on a multi-year grant from the NIH looking that's trying to determine more equitable inclusive, screening tools for autistic individuals, and one has actually been recently has come out as it's an open access publication in Autism in Adulthood, and it's this, I want to call it it's SAAT, but I'm trying to remember what the letters stand for. It's like the self advocate something, I forgot what it stands for, but basically it's traits, and it's from a non pathological, it's from an internal perspective in terms of identifying, potential autistic, qualities. And so it has some interesting features that we don't have in some of the screeners that exist now, such as like things about autistic inertia. So AWN is, the organization that Sincerely Your Autistic Child, which was originally What Every Autistic Girl Wishes Her Parents Knew. IWN partnered with Beacon Press, which is a social justice nonprofit publisher, independent publisher that's published a lot of really great books, from a lot of wonderful people. It's over 100 years old, and so AWN is partnering with Beacon Press, and for that book is out, and then there are several others, and then we will also be putting out through AWN. AWN has a small imprint, Dragon Bee Press, which is about basically empowering and disability justice publications. They're telling the stories of our people. And so probably in maybe less than a month, actually, there will be something coming out that will be free to the public by myself. It's through AWN, and it's called it's about a neurodiversity and parenting journey in color. So I feel like all organizations have their flaws, their growing pains, just like human beings. But I like the fact that that AWN is an organization that really believes in, horizontal organizing and leadership instead of vertical. So instead of everyone reporting to this supervisor, whatever, people specialize in the thing that they do really well. This one does communications really well. This person does, graphic design or arts really well. And this person does writing. And so instead of being in a role where you're having to do things that you're not really good at, people are able to kind of follow their interests, their passions, and let them kind of be expressed through AWN's work. And we also work asynchronously, and we use Crip time, so not caught, so it's just, and our meetings are also done with accommodations. Everyone from our volunteers to the staff have accommodations.
That's amazing. I really appreciate the work of AWN. I've heard this wonderful organization, and I think I signed up for the memberships. I really appreciate the work of AWN, and I'm looking forward to see, the future future works, and thank you for sharing more about AWN. So
I see we have several questions, some of them are in here. I didn't know if you had a particular order or way that you wanted us to address them.
Yeah, so the first question that I asked concludes the interview section for this part. The floor is open for questions from the audience, so we can start with the questions that was asked first.
Okay, so let me go in here to, um, so I think I mentioned a little bit about what brings me joy and healing is just kind of knowing the possibilities, like seeing where we're going, how far we've come and where we're going. And, and the creativity of our people. It's interesting, just, in all the stuff that we deal with, which there's still so much beauty, and energy sometimes, and so that drives me a great deal. It motivates me. I see that the question about, so like my parent, it's interesting because in some ways, like the experience of being multicultural, so having, immigrant parents, so being a first gen, so having all these different parts of who I am, in some parts of them, in some ways, I think have helped me thrive, with my neurodivergence. And in some other ways, they've kind of held back because I've had these different conflicting messages in my life, like the work twice is hard to get half mentality. It's in the Black community. Throw some hot sauce on that. And that's like the immigrant version because it's like that mentality is like the thing that drives you. But it's not healthy. It's not a healthy way to live. It's not, that's, productivity without peace, without necessarily purpose, and trying to, there's just a lot. I think that you lose, you gain a lot of opportunities in some of these settings, but you lose certain things about, just the sense of, collective understanding and connection, and just a lot of things. But at the same time, there's certain things about like the way that we think or move, or um, proverbs or stories, that things, that are just kind of built, almost feel like built in. I don't want to say accommodations because it's not even really like an accommodation. It's just kind of like the flow. And so in some ways, there's some of these things, like I think about the hairstyles that I had as a young girl were great for me as a sensory seeker. You know what I mean? Because I'm West African. So the braids, they were awesome. You know what I mean? That's perfect to stim with. The food, again, as a sensory seeker, was awesome. The fact that I didn't make eye contact, my parents thought that was great. They didn't have to teach me not to make eye contact. I was already doing it naturally. And so I feel like it has definitely shaped me, and it's something that I try to use in my, when talking with people, especially to try to understand that, that neurodivergence is its own culture, but it also exists within, cultures. I see there's a question about masking.
Hi.
Yes,
What did you?
sorry.
Yeah, I can introduce the questions.
Oh, sure, sure.
Great. So there's like an order for the question. So
Yeah, that makes more sense.
and thank you for answering the first question. I appreciate your response. It's interesting to learn about the family background. So for the second question, in liberation spaces, disability justice is often ignored, especially during the pandemic and not taking COVID precautions like masking. How can abolitionist organizations hold one another accountable so that ableism rooted in anti-Blackness is being dismantled, and that we care with one another, leaving no one behind?
I really wish that I had a real answer to this. I really do. Because I'm still trying to figure it out myself. Because as myself, I'm someone who is newly immunocompromised, and there are a number of circumstances where I have been unable to participate because people are feeling like the hybrid or virtual options are no longer necessary, or masking is not important, or what have you. And I think that there's a lot of things that people, don't think. And then there is so much anti-Blackness that exists, and I don't think people understand. And I know people have tried to kind of get people to understand that how, basically that, like you mentioned, it's the root of ableism, it's the foundation, and we have to work together. We have to kind of understand and kind of yield to one another. And so I think that part of the problem and why this is happening is I feel like this, there's a culture of martyrdom that, that exists in social justice and human rights work. And I think that because of that, we are already stretching ourselves so thin. So we're already dealing, oftentimes dealing with, giving from a vessel that, probably, needs some filling. And so because we're already, not coming, we're giving of ourselves when we're not at our best, and there's so much need, and there aren't sufficient resources, I think, some of the time, that contributes to the way that, the harm that we can perpetuate upon one another. And so I really feel like the one way that we can hold one another accountable is just to try to do it one person at a time. I feel like people are so I don't know, they have so much apprehension about saying I was wrong, apologizing, making amends, changing, but we're all going to be wrong. Like, that's how you grow. And so I think that by, I guess, hopefully one way we can do so is by leading by example. I think is one way, but I think that it's a slow process, but I think it's one that could really make a difference.
I agree. And I've also learned that it's important for us to approach our fears rather than just avoid them, because this is how we can grow and try to develop like a growth mindset. The concept I learned in
Yes,
my psychology classes. So I believe that can apply to like your response to this question.
absolutely.
So the third question is from Kelly. She says, "Good afternoon. Would you say that the healthcare profession has gotten better at diagnosing autism and other neurodivergent conditions in Black patients? And what should Black patients do to better advocate for themselves?"
So I have a sense of ambivalence, I'm sorry, about this one. I feel like in some ways, yes, because prior to, before, we were always recognizing that these people, but they were never recognized as being neurodivergent. They were criminalized, they were problematic, they were behavioral this, or they were violent this, or what have you. And so I think it has gotten better. I think sometimes when things get better for the general public, it can get better for some of us individually, or some groups. But I feel like there's still a lot there's still a long way to go. I think people need to so one thing that I want to explain is that people need to feel empowered. No one wants to be that patient or that parent or that student, but sometimes you have to be, because it's been demonstrated in the literature that Black parents, for example, when they're mentioning concerns because about their child, if they're not mentioning it in a way using certain terminology, then it's really ignored, and that shouldn't be the case. So it isn't that. So the diagnostic disparities and a lot of these delays are often because the parents are not taken seriously. People themselves as well, the health, some of the especially with the co-occurring health conditions that exist, there's a great deal of evidence to demonstrate that there's higher rates of certain chronic and co-occurring medical conditions in Black neurodivergent people than in our peers who are neurotypical. And so we really kind of need to be self-aware. Health advocacy is important. Researching, learning things are important. I think finding tools that can work for you. There is the Disability Rights Network. There's a collaborative project called Decoding Discrimination. And it is a project that I'm actually involved in working with, and it's funded by the With Foundation, and it's a collaboration with Foundation for Divergent Minds and Johns Hopkins University Disability Research Center and Justice Shorter, and basically it's collecting the stories of people of color with IDD, sharing their experiences that they've had of being disenfranchised or discriminated against during the pandemic in healthcare, and providing recommendations to professionals to change. And so we are seeking. So one thing that people can do, if someone is interested in, we'd love to have more voices. We'd like to have a total of 10, because we want to put out a docu-series with people sharing their experiences. And so we're going to pay an honorarium for each person's experience if they identify as having some type of IDD. And as a person of color, we'd love to hear from you. And we'd love for you to reach out, and we will feature your story if you're selected on the Sunstorm Stories website there. And so I saw that there was a question about medical model and social model. I'll just quickly do that. I feel like I really more believe in more of an interactionist model, or a model that kind of takes both into account, because I think neither one is sufficient on its own. I think the medical model can be, pathologizing and, has a lot of, makes a lot of assumptions, but the social model can only go so far, and it doesn't address certain things. So I wish there was a way for us to address medical needs without this sense of brokenness, and so I think that really like a public health model or a socio-ecological model that encompasses both is really what is needed.
And yeah, I really appreciate your response. So just to reiterate the question, just for the audience, the question that Veronica answered was, what is your take on the medical model of disability versus the social model of disability? So I remember learning about the models in my disability studies class, and the differences between the models, and how it's important that we're approaching more towards like the social model, and we're seeing how the environment influences how we express our disability, and how and ways to navigate through our life. So I really appreciate your response. So going back to the fourth
Quickly, I
question.
just wanted to share, there's a
Yeah, sure.
resource. Hari Srinivasan is a colleague of mine who is an autistic person of color, and has written a great article not very long ago, earlier this month, just a few weeks ago. I think that was in Newsweek. And it talks about how we need to kind of reconcile the medical model and the social model with one another. And so if anyone gets a chance to read that, that's, a great, voice of, one of our allies, or one of our colleagues in our community, sharing about this in a little, kind of from a personal perspective, but it's thought-provoking.
I really appreciate the resources. Yeah, these are very useful, and support to educate more people on like the different models. So going back to the fourth question by Karigan T, what makes you feel safe and cared for? What policies and changes could be created or already are established to maintain this?
It's autonomy makes me, having a sense of autonomy and choice, those things make me feel safe and cared for. Seeing I guess progress or change, or seeing, I don't know, sometimes it's interesting, like small things, or they might seem small, but watching as like certain commercials, and looking and realizing that wow, they showed, like, I don't know. I just think growing up, there wasn't a whole lot. You didn't see people who were visibly disabled, or you didn't see a lot of people of color or youth, or you didn't see same gender households, or, fat bodies, or, unless these, people were being picked, for fun, or made fun of. And so now, I guess, so for me, like representation and visibility helps. It makes me feel cared for, not necessarily safe, but I think it can lead to a sense of safety, familiarity, and security, I guess, makes me feel safe. And I think that policies, like, I just really wish that, like, I feel like there's a lot of core needs that people have in terms of the need for, core needs people have that are not met, and because of that, it's, without policies to address economic injustice, and so many other things that we're dealing with, like healthcare disparities, housing, just so many things. I feel like it's very, until we have policies to address these things, we're really still trying to catch up, in a lot of ways. And so I think that I really would love to see, a society that took an approach, less of a policing approach and more of a restorative approach to things, and valued making sure that people have the food that they need, that they have a comfortable place to live, that they have that they can contribute to life in ways that they find meaningful, and not just so driven by capitalism or ableist standards.
No, those are very good points. And I also remember taking a healthcare class and learning about the importance of that the healthcare system should be revised to to promote like inclusion and focus on like the client rather than just like for themselves. So these are really important points. So I see there's two more questions that open up. So another question by Carrie Ganti is, how can we organize to protect Black and Brown disabled children within our own local communities?
That's a great question. And so in some ways, I feel like we have some examples of these things happening. For example, the organization, The Color of Autism, exists to build capacity in communities of color, and to and to help families be able to seek resources and to amplify the voices of self-advocates. So really, it's kind of like looking at things. Is messaging or training services, are these things culturally sensitive? Are they relevant to people's lives? Are they accessible? And so I think sometimes it's just about, I feel like there's a lot of people, and this may not, it's just going to sound like the way it is, because what I think it's great that this organization here or this university here, what have you, have funding or support to do these things. But I feel like I really wish that there would be more of a focus in kind of pouring a lot of these resources into the communities so that we can develop these tools to be able to protect our own. We don't have, it's so hard to do to create something from nothing. And so if we could value, I wish we took a model kind of more like you see in the HIV research funding model, to where if you have to have a autonomous community body, or community representation, or you will not receive the funding. It's considered like a necessity, and it has to be sustained over time, and not tokenistic. It has to be interwoven into the core leadership. And so, but that is something that you don't see in a lot of education or healthcare policy overall. And so I think that we really need to shift. And I've been seeing more philanthropy groups kind of looking at investing in the people, investing in not so much just programs, but also in like general support and infrastructure, so that people can survive and keep, and stay around long enough to be able to build and mentor one another and grow.
That's great. Like mentoring is great. So those are some great points. So another question is that by Shayna is that the news and TV has a major impact on people's images on disabled people. Bouncing off of Carrigan T's question about protecting Black and Brown disabled children within our own local communities, how can news organizations further diversify the ethnicities of the disabled people they cover without tokenization?
I like that. And I think that one way, there aren't enough, but there are some organizations that have started to host like, a paid intern or a fellow or a journalism fellow to have more diverse voices in media. So allowing disabled people of color to tell our own stories, training us to be involved, so amplifying those stories would be, those venues are important. So I feel like I hope that, I guess that we could take an example from from, I'm trying to remember the name of this person and it's eluding me. But they, I cannot remember their name for the life of me, but this person has a stance where essentially if they are being involved in like a research trial, there have to be a certain amount of junior researchers involved before they will collaborate or partner with them. And so before they won't, as a consultant. So this is someone, I can't remember their name, but who is fairly highly sought after as an expert, but believes truly in mentorship. And so basically wants people to invest. Okay, if you want to hear from me, if you want to know what I have to say, how are we going to pay it forward? Show me from the very beginning, what your plan is, who are the other people in place that we are pouring into to continue this work and to build and improve on what we're doing. And so I think that we need to see more of that. We need more independent journalism too, and local journalism. I think that would also give us more diverse voices as well. And I think that there's some examples, there's some toolkit. I mean, there's some things out there that give some advice about, I hope that people about respectful language, like some communication guides, and then there's some disabled people who are openly telling their own stories, but not enough. But I just hope we can amplify the ones that are out there. And we've had people like Angel Miles has been doing this for some time, Valisa Thompson with Ramp Your Voice, and Alice Wong, just a number of people who are Eric Garcia who are there, but we need more.
Definitely agree. I also agree that we need more voices be amplified, especially among diverse communities. So another question by Shane is that I always watch the news, and if a white disabled person is highlighted, I always think, what about other BIPOC disabled people who have similar stories, disability backgrounds? Why not do more stories on BIPOC disabled people so that viewers and doctors can see disability manifested in all people?
I like that. And I think that's really important. And I'm glad to see that, because that's true allyship, because I think we all know, like, this is a very ableist society. So if a person's white and disabled, they are certainly discriminated against. So it isn't like they have it easy. But it is true that, again, that there are layers and there are nuances. We all have, different, experiences. And so, like, despite marginalizations that I have a number of privileges of my own and so forth. And so I think that yielding, in that way is important. I think that I have a few years ago, I made a decision that for like speaking engagements and projects that were, if they were contributing like an honorarium, that if there was not if there were not individuals who I felt who were underrepresented in the community, such as someone who is primarily non-speaking, or someone who identifies as intellectually disabled, or what have you, or people who don't have maybe higher education privilege, involved in some type of a central role, paid role, then I would not be involved. And sometimes people are in a they're in a coordinating or a planning position. Everyone doesn't want to be on stage speaking visibly, and that's fine, because there's a lot of power in the work behind the scenes. But I just felt like as much as it's great that I can it can be a face of my my ethnicity, my race, and so forth, there are still there's people who don't have privileges that I have, that need to be heard from. And so building on that, it makes me think about the there are a lot of circumstances that that I think we have. There are a lot of problems in our system in the West, but we have a lot of privilege as well, despite our problems. Like I think about, like, if you go to various different parts of in the global South, or specifically talk about Africa, as my family is from there, in terms of providers, being able to find adequate providers that are nearby, that are trained or qualified, or that are affordable, to be able to have situations like the free appropriate public education that we have here with the IDEA and the ADA in Section 504. We have that legislation available. It's not perfect, it's very flawed, but it's in place. So it isn't a situation where you have to send your child to some disabled only segregated school, private school that takes nearly all of your salary, that's hours away from home, or where they have to stay at home in general, or they're not cared for, or properly educated, where there's just a lot with the terminology that is used, and where people are maybe even thinking that there's something like some type of sin or curse in your family because of the disability. It's seen, and it's interesting because there's also a lot of history when you think about like, culturally, there's also ways that we amplify, elements of disability. But I think that in terms of this, the medicalized model has really started to take hold and has really has started to impact people in a way that's very challenging. And so we can learn a lot from our colleagues and our brethren in other places in terms of how they're making do with a lot less. Not that one should have less, but kind of really, I think, focusing on what's on what a person's strengths and what's important.
That's great. So we'll take a few more questions. So Karagan T asked, thank you so much for sharing your story and wisdom, Moreniki, Giwa, and Naiwu. Are there any calls to action you have for us today?
Yes. So what I would like to encourage everyone to do is, I think, so we all have the thing that, whatever it is that we care about. Maybe it's, art, maybe it's music, maybe it's research. But I would just like to encourage people to find a way to something that you're not really aware of or familiar with, but you could provide some kind of help or support. Try to find a way to do that sometime, this, within, the next, few weeks or what have you. So if it's, your school district, maybe you don't have any children that are in school and you're not in school, but if you live in an area where there's a school, you can get online and figure out is there a special education committee or a disability, education or rights committee or consumer group, disability rights group that you can find out about. Can you go online and see when they meet? Maybe you can't go, but maybe they have an email box where you can send a public comment, or maybe you have, or maybe they have, resources about, or grants or information that you could share with someone else on the listserv. Is there is there something you can donate to? Like, it doesn't have to be a lot, but I mentioned to you, people gave $1, $5, literally, I'm not exaggerating, for and all of those $1, $5 here helped us build our anthology. Is there some project some type of grassroots project that, that in the disability community, particularly disabled people of color, that you could support? Is there can you read something? There's so many more voices coming out, of people who are sharing their stories, disabled people of color. Lamar Hardwick has another book coming out. It's about ableism and the church. And even if one is not, doesn't consider themselves, practicing, theist in terms of, some of the Western religions, it's still an interesting read. It's available for pre-order. And so educate yourself. Another thing that I'd like to ask people to consider doing is there is a free resource made by an autistic person. It's called the Autistic Archive. So if you Google those words, Autistic Archive, they'll literally come up. It's a Google site, and Ira Idle is behind it. And it's basically there's several YouTube videos, and then there's like websites, and it's kind of like a comprehensive, from the community, history of like the autistic rights movement. And I think there's a lot we can gain and learn from those who, from things that happened before us. Some of the struggles we're having now, people were having earlier in the movement, and we could learn from some of the, tactics that they used, and just kind of also, I think, encourage ourselves.
Yeah, I agree that it's important to encourage ourselves. So another question by Shayna is, how was it getting accommodated as an autistic Black woman? How hard did your parents had to fight for accommodations growing up?
Ooh. Shayna, my goodness. Let me tell you, I at one point thought my mother was going to lose her job because she had to leave work so much to come up to the school for this thing or that thing. My father wrote these letters, these long legalese letters to people. It's like everyone there. It was, I won't say it almost. It was like if no one wanted to provide. They wanted to provide as little as possible. So if you were quote unquote smart, then you should be fine. You shouldn't need anything. And if you were supposedly slow, then we're not going to even bother to teach you, which is, that's, like, I think it was Laura, I can't remember her last name, who said, who's, I believe, attributed with saying, high functioning means your needs are ignored, and low functioning means your strengths are ignored. And so, either way, it's discriminatory. You're not giving people what they need. So I was constantly told that I was plagiarizing things. So my parents had to literally keep stuff out of the trash, like handwritten things, to show them, no, this is how she writes, or that I was being rude, or that, I had a lot of headaches, migraines. And so there were a few times we had to appeal because although I had almost all straight A's, I had so many absences that they wanted to retain me, because school districts get money, the more attendance you have. And so my parents, and it's interesting, we didn't even have an idea of really what my diagnoses were. They just knew that I was their child, and I shouldn't have gotten a detention because I wanted to read after finishing my work, or because I answered a rhetorical question from the teacher. And so I know that's not everyone doesn't have that privilege of parents who can do those types of things. My parents didn't know anything about the American school system. So, maybe if they had known a little more, they would have been a little bit more hesitant to kind of do some of those things, but I'm grateful for them. I know every family cannot do that. And that's why I think it's so important that we also encourage our youth to try to advocate for themselves, to know what their rights, and to speak up for themselves, because there are some great people in the education system and in these youth systems, and then there's some horrible people too. And so we got to encourage and empower our parents, because that's who's with that kid. That's who's with them every day, their family. We're not. So encourage the child, encourage the parent, encourage really the village around them.
Yeah, I agree. That's important to encourage your families and be supportive of children, the youth. Do you have a few minutes to answer one or two more questions?
Sure.
Okay, great, thank you. So another question by Karagan T is, what message do you have for disabled people who may be feeling hopeless and isolated right now?
I would tell you, you're not alone. And y'all probably can't tell, but maybe before. So aside from the fact that I guess connected in the wrong link earlier, but before that, so as a person, I'm multiply disabled and have, various things going on. And, I love my life, I love myself, but some things are hard. Some days are hard. Sometimes there's pain, like physical pain, emotional pain. And earlier today was one of those days. I didn't know, I was like, okay, I have this, I committed to this, and then I have, a doctor's appointment later. How am I going to even get out of bed to do any of these things? And I just didn't know how I was going to be able to do it. And I just decided, what, I just listened to some music. I just did what I could, today is a very sensory heavy day. I have alopecia, and I'm wearing this because I tried to put the wig on today, and it just felt too heavy and uncomfortable. And so sometimes you just got to show up. You feel hopeless, you feel isolated, you just got to come do, because you're something that you're bringing that is helpful to others and is of value. And thank you, Kerrigan. The ways that you can support my work, just really, I think what supports me is kind of building educating others around, I guess, around us. The less, when people, it's so nice to be in a situation where it doesn't have to be you, so when people are explaining or, making concessions for things, I guess, I guess what I'm trying to say is, bystander advocacy is real, all of those things that look small, they matter, they they make it worthwhile. When I met a mother the other day, and she and her husband are kind of struggling with their daughter's diagnoses, and I shared with them some words from that was written on a blog of another autistic person, and just seeing the relief in this mother's face, because she was thinking that, something wrong with me because I struggle with this, or I don't have all the answers. And I let her see that, it's not just so simple for any of us. It's complicated. Having that to be able to having that is helpful. So I guess if you can, that's one way to support. Advocacy Without Borders is a nonprofit. So donations are always great. It's advocacywithoutborders.org, and they're tax deductible. But again, not just my work, any of the organizations that I mentioned, AWN, National Disability Rights Network, Justice Shorter, Foundations for Divergent Minds, all of these, any ways. And it's not always about contributing money, contributing ideas, thoughts, comments, encouragement is always helpful too.
That's great. And just a final question before we wrap out is if you could put an actionable toolbox together of next steps that we could take away from this conversation, what would that look like? And how does this apply to our youth? What can they say?
I like that. And so I guess what I would do is maybe, I would say, like, one thing to do would be to maybe to challenge yourself to learn something new. So maybe one of these resources that have been shared today, you could spend a little time, on reviewing some of them, like, so if you could kind of just familiarize yourself maybe with the work of an organization or an activist that you're not, don't know as much about, or a new initiative that they're doing, or, or some history. And then if you could share that with someone, if you teach that, that to someone, and then if you could find someone who you see is making efforts, maybe bumbling in their efforts, is there someone that you can kind of encourage in your life, a classmate, a friend, someone who is trying? You see them trying, they may still have got a long way to go, but how can you, kind of just, be some encouragement for them, that day, someday. So I would like to ask you to do that as well. And then I would like you to also maybe write down 3 questions. What are some things that you want to know, or you grow or improve in? What are some things that you want to know more about? What are there some things that you want to do differently? And what are some things that you wish you had known? Like, maybe if you kind of like have those as reflective questions for yourself.
Yeah, it's great to reflect. It's an important aspect of our lives. So I really appreciate your response.
Thanks.
So thank you for responding to all these questions. And thank you for the audience and everyone for so much for joining part 1 of the Brilliant Minds Collective webinar series, Disability and Race, Intersectionality Between Identity and Disability Advocacy. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Encourage you to register for part 2, entitled Equity and Inclusion for the Black and Disabled, and more details will be presented in the future. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, so much. All right, have a great day.